Hello, my friends. Those words in the Abenaki language, the language of my ancestors and my family, simply mean hello, simply mean my friends. I'd also say which means you appear new to me, in part because I'm seeing you for the first time, but also because we say in our traditions that everyone is always growing and changing every day. So each day you see those you know, you are seeing people who have changed from the last time you saw them. We are all connected together, we say, in a great circle, a circle of breath that is shared. As I speak, my words are carried on my breath, as I blew into that flute, that hikpongan, hollow object that you blow into to make music. That breath became part of the shared breath in this room. We're all connected together. You heard earlier the sound of the drum beat, and that wonderful performance that preceded me. And that sound of the drum which is circular, a shape that includes all of us, and everything that lives is part of the circle. That drum beat, that double beat, which is the heartbeat, is the first music any of you heard. Because even before you were born, you could hear your mother's heartbeat. That music that is shared by all human beings. And so we say the drum stands for our mother, the earth. The drum beat is the heartbeat of the earth. And that drum beat that you carry within you, that sound of the drum you hear, should remind you, always listen to your mother. This is what we call a greeting or a gathering song. In the Abenaki language, it calls people together. Higo, higo, le. Way-oh, hey, way-oh, hey. Wow-dee-oh, wow-dee. Wow-dee-oh, wow-dee. Storyteller, I constantly am being inspired by the stories I see each day, by the stories I hear each day, by the stories I remember that were shared with me by elders, many of whom are no longer walking upon this earth, but whose stories continue to carry that message. We would always tell stories for at least two reasons. One, stories are enjoyable to hear. People like to hear a story. But two, a story contains useful lessons you can learn from the story. And in our traditions throughout this continent, the old way of teaching was to tell a story. If a child did something they should not do, instead of saying, "You are really stupid," not do that. Instead of striking them repeatedly with a large, heavy object, again, not a wise thing to do, for the heads of children are hard and might damage a large, heavy object. Bad treatment doesn't really solve anything. It just makes you feel bad about yourself. So instead of punishment, we would offer the guidance of a story and say, you need to hear a story. Now, as we tell stories, often our time for storytelling is when the days are short and the nights are long. When the leaves have fallen from the trees, and back where I come from, the far northeast, the snow is deep on the ground. We would gather around the fire at night and hear the stories told. But sitting around the fire at night, sometimes people start to fall asleep. Storytellers want you to be wide awake and listening. So to make sure you're all awake and still listening, when I say ho, I want you to say hey, to show me you're awake and listening. Ho? 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 Very good. And this story is an old story. It's a story that comes from a long time ago. It's a very old story. They say that long ago, in the beginning times, there were many dangerous creatures that walked upon this earth, huge beings. Now, in those days, there was one called Bruchac. Bruchac in our language means the one who made himself from speech. And this one, Bruchac, was put upon this earth by the great mystery, Matinee, and given the job of making this earth a better place for the human beings that would soon come here. As Bruchac walked around, he looked about him and saw those animals and thought to himself, I wonder what the animals will do when they see a human being for the first time. I better call them together and ask them. And so he called a great meeting of all those animals in those days. Everyone spoke the same language, human and animal. Bruchac, the first in the shape of a human, could understand everything those animals said. And as they sat around, he said, my friends, my friend animals, I want you to come up one by one and tell me what you will do when you see a human being for the first time. Well, the first one to step forward was the one we call Bruchac, the big bear. In those days, bear was so large, his head would touch the ceiling of this room. His feet were huge, his mouth was gigantic. And when Bruchac said, my friend, what will you do when you see a human being? That giant bear said, I will swallow him with one gulp. Bruchac thought about that. He said to himself, I do not think human beings will find it pleasant to be swallowed by bears. I better do something. And so he said to that bear, my friend, you've got some burrs caught in your fur. Sit down here in front of me and I will comb them out with my fingers. That bear had sat down. And Bruchac began to run his hand along the back of that huge bear. And each time he did so, the bear got smaller and smaller and smaller, until it became the size that bears are to this day. And then when Bruchac said, and now what will you do when you see a human being? That bear said, run away, which is what bears usually do to this day. Now the next one to come forward was an animal whose name you may know, for his Abenaki name is the name he is called in English. He was called Moose. What kind of animal would that be? A moose. In fact, the word moose in the Abenaki language means the strange one, because moose looks really strange. But back then, moose was gigantic. His antlers were the size of trees and sharp as spears. His hooves were so big around, he was so gigantic, the earth shook beneath his feet. And when Bruchac said to him, what will you do when you see a human being? That giant moose said, steer them in my hooves, throw them over the trees, and stomp on them until they're flat as your hand. Again, Bruchac thought about that. I do not think that human beings will get much satisfaction out of being speared and flattened by moose, he said to himself. And so he said to that moose, my friend, you seem to be very strong. Let's have a contest. I'll hold my hands up and you try to push me backwards. And the moose agreed. Leaned over to put his antlers in one of Bruchac's hands and his nose against the other, and began to push. But Blue Scobot did not move, and that moose's antlers got much smaller and rounder, and that moose got shorter and shorter, and its nose got all smushed in, the way it is to this day. When he was done, Blue Scobot said, "And now what will you do when you see a human being and that moose is run away?" Now the next animal to step forward, Hope, was the most dangerous, Hope, the most violent, Hope, the most frightening of all, this gigantic creature we call Kitsy McQuay. And what sort of creature do you suppose Kitsy McQuay was? No. Good guesses, but I will tell you, Hope, Kitsy McQuay was the huge, giant, deadly, dangerous red squirrel. He was a lot bigger then, and really, really bad tempered. When Blue Scobot asked him what he would do when he saw a human being, that red squirrel said, I will destroy and crush you into trees and rocks. I will destroy every living being in the world. Once again, Blue Scobot thought, I do not think that human beings will find it truly happy to be torn apart by red squirrels. And so he said, my friend, you have some birds stuck in your fur. Why don't you sit down and let me comb them out? And this time, as he ran his hand along that squirrel, making him smaller each time, because that squirrel was so bad-tempered, he kept going until that squirrel fit right in the palm of his hand. And then little McQuay jumped up, ran to the top of the tallest tree. To this day, red squirrel still has a bad temper. But because he's so small, he's not so dangerous. Even though when we go in the forest, sometimes squirrel will see you and cry down in his terrible voice, I will destroy you, I will destroy you, and hurl down giant acorns and pine cones trying to crush you. Finally, only one animal was left. Now some animals, like the deer, when the deer was asked what he would do, deer said, oh, just run away from him. When Mutterglass the rabbit was asked what he would do when he saw a human being, the rabbit said, run around foolishly in circles and be terrifying. That's what the rabbit does to this day. At last, though, just one creature sat there in the middle of the clearing, wagging its tail. It was Dog. And Blue Scobot said to Dog, what will you do when you see a human being? Will you harm them in some way? And that dog said, no, I've been waiting for the human beings to come because I want to be your best friend. I want to go to wherever they go. I want to share their food and play with their children and sleep in the houses with them. And Blue Scobot looked at that dog. He could see that dog's heart was good. He said, my friend, you will be a better friend to the human beings than many of them deserve. And so it is that we will call you Alamos, the one who always walks beside us. And to this day, so it is. Alamos, the dog, is always by the side of the people and has been so since long ago. Hope